This episode is brought to you by Tom Harris, aka Tattoo Tom. Tom is a tattoo artist in Bournemouth who specialises in colourful tattoos, especially fandom ones. He is a master of the art. He's blended everyone together from a Stitch and Harry Potter to Pikachu and Iron Man, and they all look insanely good. I speak from experience. He's actually tattooed myself. I had a tattoo done somewhere else of Woody from Toy Story, and it looked frankly awful. So bad that I would hate getting my arm out in public, so I got in touch with Tom and he redid it for me, and now it looks great. Woody actually looks like Woody, and I love showing my tattoo off now. But Tom isn't actually just a tattoo artist. He's also an animal rights activist and has a book coming out next year called Till Every Cage is Empty, Inside the Animal Liberation Movement. Tom's genuinely done some amazing things in his life, and he's detailing it in this book, and I can't wait to read it. If you want a sneak preview, book yourself a tattoo and sit down for a few hours as I did, mesmerised about all the things he's done to help animals that are in desperate need of it. So do check out tattoo_Tom on Instagram, Facebook and online, and you can also find him in the tattoo studio he co-owns in Bournemouth in a place called Chimera, spelt Chimera. And also look out for his book coming next spring. And now it's time for the podcast. Chapter 2. The Writings on the Wall. Today marks the 5th week since Storm Rewan tore through the small town of Vickering. Residents here have been searching day and night across fields and hills for all of those who have been reported missing, of which there are still an estimated 40 people, both adults and children, amongst them. As Leo listened to the morning news report from his bed, he tried as he did every waking second to think back to what happened. All he could remember were the seconds that led up to blacking out. Then it is straight into waking up in hospital the next day. There the nursing staff were pushed to breaking point as they tended to all who had been injured. His mum had only managed to find him through sheer luck and tenacity, which should have been comforting, but her screams from finding only one of her children still haunted Leo. Since then, every day had been dedicated to clearing up the debris, which Leo thought had been to help look for those missing. But with the debris gone, everyone had just returned to their daily routines. Commuters once again hurried their way to and from work as families endeavoured to return to their versions of normality. Irrelevantly relevant issues like whose turn it was to take the bins out was a thing again. At least, that was the case for most families. Some were still broken, every night going to bed and hoping they could wake up to find that it was all just a nightmare, only to wake and have to live their nightmare for yet another day. "You getting up, Leo?" his mother said gently from the other side of his door, which was adorned with everything from movie posters to his very own amateur animal sketches. "Just getting out of bed." Today marked the first day that the orchard reopened its gates, something Leo and his mum had debated back and forth whilst trawling through the local fields. "Okay," she hesitated. "I've been thinking. I know we've gone over you going back to school, and I know how much you want to, and this isn't me trying to stop you. I was just hoping that you'd let me take you in rather than, you get the bus." "That'll be nice, Mum," he said. "Thank you." As Leo put on his slightly tattered school clothes for just the second time that year, he was taken back to the now seemingly trivial arguments he had listened to as he put them on the first time. A twisted feeling hit his gut as he thought about how annoyed he had gotten at his brother's dawdling, and now he wished he had dawdled some more. Perhaps then he would still be here. Absent-mindedly, Leo made his way downstairs and into the kitchen, where every surface was spotless, the fake marble worktops basking in their rare cleanliness. Only Leo's homemade lunch sat on the side awaiting him in a little plastic tub, and he smiled at the sight of his sandwich and its reduced to clear label. Even with one less mouth to feed, times were still hard. "It'll have to do for now," Leo's mother said. "You ready?" I guess." The smell of rain on dry concrete seeped through the air as Leo's mum, after a few spluttering tries, managed to get their car to start. The ancient vehicle gurgled back to life, sounding like an elderly man who had been woken from his mid-afternoon nap. Leo could see the toll the past few weeks had taken on his mum, and that toll was only ever increased by the fact that, even though she wanted to search for Sam, bills were still coming in, and from years of scraping to get by, Leo knew that a single mum working in retail could not afford to stay off work for long. Everything looks the same, Leo observed, looking at the world outside of his window. But it all seems so different. What do you mean? She asked. They drove down the same road Leo and his brother had to walk down towards the bus stop. It was still lined by the same old trees, only with fewer leaves as the seasons changed. Cars still drove their same route as the same people still made their same journeys. Well, everyone is still doing the same thing they always have, but it just feels different somehow. I guess it's like when everyone comes over at Christmas, who we hardly ever see. They always look the same at first, but then you notice those more subtle changes the longer you look. I think, anyway, Leo explained, as he looked out of the window at everyone they went past, able to read the stories of what they had gone through by the lines on their face. I know what you mean. It feels weird to be going back to normal so soon. Everyone's signs are still up all around the village. Leo's mum was referring to the signs that would normally show missing pets, but now showed the faces of missing children. Looks like everyone else is getting a lift in as well, Leo said, seeing the bus shelter that was normally full of children, but instead stood barren. Everything was the same, and yet nothing was. "Watch out!" Leo shouted as a fox darted from a bush, forcing his mum to press the brakes. Looking back at them, the fox tilted its head curiously, as if wondering what all the fuss was about. Seemingly having come to its conclusion, the fox carried on crossing and then dived into the bushes on the other side. Why don't they just wait around until there are no cars? They don't know any better. You imagine being an animal for a second, your instincts having evolved only to be faster than whatever's trying to catch you, and then suddenly you're faced with cars and lorries. We may know that they move. It was just a rhetorical question, Mum, Leo interjected with a smile, and his heart lifted as she did the same for what seemed like the first time in weeks. As well as the posters of missing people, graffiti was also appearing on the walls and fences with children's names and pleas for help. "Please come home, Brendan. Police have given up, but we never will. Bring home our children. R.I.P. the children lost in ruin." The messages tended to overlap each other, but as they went past an abandoned house, amongst all the graffiti was one message that stood out amongst the rest. "Find Libero." Leo figured it must have been written by some people who could not spell and paid it no more mind. Unlike the fox, this lot don't have evolution to blame, Leo's mum grumbled as she honked the horn at children who stepped into the road as the orchard's familiar sign came into view. It had two poles decorated to look like tree stumps, and they held aloft a sign designed to look like a blossoming tree. Leo's mum pulled up next to the swarms of dark brown blazes that made their way up the winding paths between the thin trees towards the school. "Now, you give me a kiss goodbye, but my friends are just there," Leo whined, looking over at Kyra and Dorian, who were waiting by the gates. "So, I'm sure they gave their parents a kiss goodbye too. There's no need to be embarrassed," she said, pulling him in for a hug while he was distracted. "Get off!" Leo tried to stifle his laugh as he pushed her away. "You're in year 10 now, Leo. You shouldn't be worrying about kissing your mum goodbye. You'll have girlfriends soon enough. Speaking of which, Kyra must be jealous as she's on her way over." Leo's face flushed scarlet as he tried to pat his hair back down before looking around, only to see Kyra still standing in the same place. "Got you? Well, thanks for the lift." Leo tried to leave with some of his self-imagined bravado still intact, but his mum stopped him as her giggling died down to be replaced with the same look of the past few weeks. Getting up from his seat, Leo leant over to give her a tight squeeze, and she rested her head against his. Am I getting the bus home? I've got work. Stick with your friends and call me if you need anything. Don't worry, Mum. I'll be fine, he said as he gave her one last hug. Love you. Fallen leaves crackled under Leo's feet as those remaining on their branches brushed against each other in the soft breeze. How's it going? Kyra asked as Leo joined them. You know how it is, Leo replied. Did Bailey get on the bus? No one was there when we drove past. Yeah, her parents had to work, answered Dorian. Just on cue, a brand new number 5 swerved around the corner and into the orchard. This bus had none of the creaks or squeals of the old one, and it proudly let out a soft hiss as it came to a smooth stop. Children immediately piled off and headed straight for their form rooms as Bailey followed on behind, taking a slight tumble as she jumped off the last step. Anything happen on the ride in? Leo asked Bailey before she could speak. Did you see anything? Good to see you too, Leo, but nah, it's still the same roads we've been searching, just from higher up. Nothing out of the ordinary? Leo had not told anyone about what he had seen following his brother in the bushes, or even about what he had seen inside the tornado. He did not want them to think he was crazy. The more he thought about it, the more he questioned his own mind. Nothing. I saw a guy setting up a camera to film some woman who's picking out the best missing child posters to stand by. But that's about it. The press had come in almost as heavy as the storm itself. They had immediately started interviewing the public and harassing the families who had lost someone. But as time went on and as nothing progressed, they had all started to lose interest, and the best they got now was the morning report Leo had woken up to. Well, I guess we'd better get this over with, Kyra said, taking a deep breath as she turned to face the school. Take 2, Leo added. And action, Dorian finished. They headed up one of the leaf-covered paths to the right that took them to Blossom Block, home to their form room. At least we've got form with Mr. Delph first thing back, Bailey noted, as they climbed their way up the cold stone steps towards the second-floor geography classrooms. Imagine being stuck with Mrs. Tibatoro first thing, said Leo. Mr. Delph was the happiest teacher you were likely to meet, a smile as much a part of his dress code as the clothes themselves. Mrs. Tibatoro, on the other hand, was the scariest teacher around. Her name alone was enough to strike fear into the students' hearts, and that was before you heard the steady sound of her high heels echoing around the maths department as she approached. As Leo and his friends joined the rest of autumn in their form room, Leo looked around for the familiar sight of Mr. Delph's beaming grin, the one he had seen every morning since his first day at school. Today, however, was once again proving to be a little different, for Mr. Delph did not greet each student as they came in, but sat behind his desk staring blankly towards the closed blinds. I guess these should really be open, Mr. Delph said in his Greek accent as he walked towards the windows and pulled the cord. Good morning, Autumn. Good morning, Mr. Delph, came the reply of the few pupils who were not looking at him. Those who were watching him stayed silent, unsure on if he was talking to the class or just to the world outside. What's wrong with him? Kyra whispered to Leo as they watched him return to his seat and look back out of the window. I don't know. His eyes are bloodshot, Dorian answered for Leo. His impressive hearing made it almost impossible for anyone to whisper without him listening in. Leo stared at Mr. Delph and saw only remnants of their favourite teacher. His grey hair had long been receding, but what was left had become thin and unkempt. Those famously thick eyebrows of his, which would usually weave up and down like 2 caterpillars playing tag on his forehead, now rested gravely above his eyes. He just sat silently, spinning the ring on his ring finger before turning to his form. A big warm welcome to you all, Mr. Delph said, forcing what was meant to be a smile but ended up as more of a grimace. I'm sorry for the delay in getting this year started. He held tightly onto his ring finger. But it's time we start getting back to a new normal. This will hopefully be a great year for all of you. Year 10 is when we start making all of your dreams become reality. By a show of hands, who's nervous about this year? No one raised their hand until a girl called Melanie tentatively lifted hers into the air, and her hand was then slowly joined by the rest of the class. I thought as much. Let me tell you, Year 10, you have no reason to be. Life's too short for worrying. Life's about taking the opportunities handed to us and doing all we can to make a success of them, and thus ourselves. The future bears the gifts we work for in the present, meaning with dedication and hard work mixed with a little play, just a little. This will be your year. Your year to take a step forward into the unknown that is your future. Though this will be a significant and perhaps daunting step, it's a step that takes you closer to being whatever you want to be. Mr. Delph sat back in his chair for a moment, allowing whispers to gain momentum in his silence. Anyway, I thought we'd do a little quiz on our first day back to help us get our thinking caps back on. The quiz, of course, is geographical in its nature. Finally, an actual smile, Bailey whispered as Mr. Delph gave his first near smile. While I'm doing this, Tommy, would you mind handing out the timetables, please? Tommy, a small but outgoing boy, proudly bounded up to Miss Delph's desk and took hold of the timetables just as light from the projector rebounded off the teacher's head as he faced the board. His light blue shirt and navy trousers were projected upon by the presentation meant for the board behind him. Mr. Delph's natural phenomenons. I know it's early, so to help get you motivated, whoever gets a question right will win themselves a sweet. Leo and his friends sat up immediately, each of them as competitive as the other, especially when food was involved. Question 1 flashed up on the screen. What are the goats in Morocco famous for? Silence. Perhaps I should have warned you that I don't give sweets away lightly. It will involve you engaging those brains of yours. Silence. Fine, a clue to help get the ball rolling. It involves a tree, the argan tree to be precise. Would anyone like to hazard a guess? Melanie was once again the first to raise a tentative hand above her long brown hair, looking around to see if anyone else had raised theirs. I'm not sure if this is right, she began, pulling her hair across her face. But are they the goats that climb trees? Fantastic! Well done, Melanie. The first sweet is yours, Mr. Delph exclaimed, throwing a purple sweet in her direction. As the next slide flashed up and showed 11 goats standing on the branches of a tree, Leo received his timetable and he quickly scanned its contents. Yes, that was spot on. These goats in Morocco actually climb trees and will casually stand there eating fruit as if it is totally normal. But I guess to them it is. He smiled. Leo was happy with most of his timetable, but his eyes were drawn to a scribble in the top right-hand corner. Find Libero. What is this? Leo whispered to Kyra, but she was already distracted by the appearance of the second question, and upon seeing it, so was Leo. What is formed when electronically charged particles from the sun combine with various other gases? Hopefully, question 2 will be easier for the young scientists amongst us, Mr. Delph said, as hands shot up all around the room. I can see our scientists have come out in force, if you'll pardon the pun. Dorian, I understand that you are taking chemistry this year. What might the answer be? I believe you're referring to the Aurora Borealis, sir, Dorian said, matter-of-factly. Excellent, excellent. Mr. Delph threw a golden sweet towards Dorian, who snatched it from the air as a picture of the northern lights flashed up on the screen. Leo and Kyra deflated, so Leo distracted himself by grabbing one of the textbooks from the outside of the room and flicked through it. Yes, as Dorian correctly stated, the answer is of course the Aurora Borealis, or as you probably know it, the Northern Lights. Leo found himself on a page titled The UK's Lakes, which featured pictures of different landscapes and diagrams on how lakes form. He looked at a picture of a peaceful lake that was bordered by hills. The hills themselves were covered with tall, dark green trees and small patches of light grey rock, but over the tranquil scenery was more scribbled writing. Find Libero. Leo flicked through the rest of the pages in the book and found that it had only been written on this one page. He took another textbook off the side and flicked through to find that it also had the same thing scribbled on the very same page. Just that page. He looked at what was written underneath the picture. The Lake District National Park. You can see this phenomenon in various parts of the world, sometimes even as close to home as Scotland. Now, finally, my last question before you begin your year. Mr. Delph's words had become background noise to Leo as he brought up the third question. What animals can turn their heads a massive 270 degrees? Easy, shouted Bailey, bringing Leo back to the real world as her hand shot into the air. Now, most of you should get this one. Nevertheless, just because it's slightly more well known than the others, that doesn't make it any less of a phenomenon. Hands reached towards the ceiling as little whines of desperation escaped Leo's classmates. I thought as much. Tell you what, to make it fairer, I will pick a name randomly from the register. Mr. Delph closed his eyes and dramatically swirled the paper version of the register on his desk before he slammed a finger onto a name. Leo, where are you? With Dorian and the rest, of course. His murky blue eyes met Leo's. Before answering, Leo looked around the class and found all eyes were fixed on him, and he automatically lowered his body a few inches to try and get out of view. Isn't it an owl? Leo questioned, his voice shaking slightly under the pressure of answering. Bravo, Leo! The last sweet is yours! Hands fell from the air as quickly as the sound of disappointment went up into it, and Mr. Delph changed the slide to show a picture of an owl. There we have the great horned owl, capable of turning its head 270 degrees, a skill that would make it a lot easier to keep an eye on you lot. The whole class laughed. Everyone except Leo, that was. Mr. Delph threw the last sweet in his direction. It just bounced off his chest as he stared transfixed at the screen. There, projected in front of him, were the very same eyes that had stared through him the day Rewan had torn through his town. Those same eyes that had followed his brother like a predator on the hunt. Those eyes that had then appeared from the centre of the tornado. They appeared smaller on the screen, but the vibrant, blazing yellow was as unmistakable as it was unforgettable. Leo, are you okay? Kyra's voice sounded distant as she shook his hand. You're shaking. Sure enough, as Leo looked at his hands, he saw them trembling in hers, and felt how cold they were against the warmth of her skin. What's wrong? Bailey asked, hopping out of her chair. Leo looked at the class to find that all eyes were back to being fixed firmly on him. Everyone back to their tables. Have a look at where you need to go first, period, Mr. Delph ordered, as he made his way towards Leo and knelt beside his chair. The return of his smile proved to be short-lived as it was replaced with a look of concern. I'm fine, sir. Don't worry. I get it, Leo. I thought it was too early to bring everyone back to school after what happened. Before everyone's been found. Before anyone has been found. Mr. Delph allowed himself a deep breath. I'm sorry about what happened. If there is anything I can do to help, please just let me know. We've plenty of sweets at the ready if you need them. Just take the week a day at a time, and soon enough it'll be half term and we can continue searching. Leo nodded, unsure of what to say and still aware that even though the eyes of the class were off him, everyone's ears were still perfectly tuned in to what was being said. There's a good lad. Mr. Delph placed a hand on Leo's shoulder before whispering just loud enough that only he and probably Dorian could hear. "Never give up hope, Leo. We will find them. We just need to keep believing." As Mr. Delph stood up, the bell rang to signal that it was time for the first lesson of the year. "What happened?" Kyra asked as she stood up. "Look at this." Leo pointed at the words scribbled in the textbook and on his timetable. "That's odd," Bailey said, leaning over Leo's shoulder. "What's a libero? I don't believe it to be a libero as much as what is libero," Dorian interjected. "Kyra, can you look it up?" "Yes, boss," Kyra saluted, and then reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone before searching for the word libero. "Tell me that I'm right," Bailey said, her dark skin glimmering in the rising sun. Unfortunately, Mr. Know-It-All was right. Libero is the Latin translation for freedom. Specifically, it means to set free, to deliver, or to liberate. Kyra read before looking up to find Leo beaming at her. "What? A moment ago it looked like you'd seen a ghost. Now you're creeping me out with this weird grin thing you've got going on." "This could be it," he said excitedly. "This could be what?" "This could be the answer. The answer to where everyone is. The answer to getting Sam back." "Right. Leo, you don't think you're reading a little bit too much into this, do you?" asked Bailey, hesitantly. "This isn't the first time I've seen it. It's been cropping up everywhere. It is everywhere." Leo indicated the textbooks in front of him and opened another to the same page, again revealing the same words. "I don't know, Leo," Kyra said, just as Mr. Delph came over to them. "Time to go, kids," he said, ushering them towards the door. "Have a good first day back." As they reached the door, they all looked at where they were heading first. "Please tell me I'm not the only one with Mrs. Tibatoro," Kyra exhaled. "Don't worry, I'm with you," Leo said, unenthused by the idea of having to sit through maths rather than come up with more theories about what libero meant. Besides the usual terror and unease of a Mrs. Tibatoro lesson, the rest of the day went by with Leo in a hopeful daze, one that was constantly met by an unsure look from his friends, so much so that he did not speak about it until at last Kyra brought it up on the bus journey home. "It was just a word, Leo. I have never known you to pay attention to anything written in a textbook. Don't get your hopes up and let this be the first time." Leo knew that it was an incredibly thin lead, but he did not understand why they were not as excited as he was about there finally being a semblance of a lead. He had worked all day on the beginnings of a plan, and they had paid it no more thought than the anxious ones he could see on their faces. "You are literally sitting on the edge of your seat, Leo," said Bailey. "It could have just been a misprint in the book, and Mr. Delph has just amended it." "No," Leo said firmly. "It's been following me everywhere. Find libero. It feels like something is pointing us towards where we need to go. I think this is where we'll find Sam." Leo looked hopefully at his friends, but was met by blank and almost sheepish expressions. "Maybe it is, but what if it's not?" Dorian said, falling back into his seat as the bus pulled away. "I, for one, have never seen the word anywhere else." "Maybe it's not meant for you to see it. Maybe it's meant for me. It has been everywhere that I have. Scribbled on pathways, written in books, and on my timetable. I even saw it spray painted onto that abandoned house on the way in." "So you've seen a word in 4 places. What are you proposing we do after seeing this one word a few times?" asked Dorian. "It's going to sound mad. I know it is, but it's the only lead we've had since Rewan. I think we should go to the Lake District in half-term." Leo's friends looked anywhere but his eyes. Even Kyra, who he could always count on as being the one person to have his back, averted her gaze. He dropped into the bench as his previously soaring heart sank back to the pit of his stomach. He knew it was going to be hard to get them on board, but he did not know what else there was left to do that had not already been done. The branches that clattered against the roof brought him out of his torpor and drew his attention outside. The abandoned house was about to come into view, and Leo's heart began to race. He knew that although none of them had said anything, his friends would be looking for the same thing he was. Long brown grass covered the front garden, separated by weeds and rusting car parts that had been resting on a lawn for as long as Leo could remember. Window frames filled only with shards of glass were adorned with white paint that fought to peel away from the house's rotting corpse. Leo scanned the house for the word he had seen scrawled across the legions of graffiti that had given the house colour, but as the bus drove slowly past, his heart sank again. It had gone. As the bus turned a corner and the house disappeared, he found his friends looking at him with pity etched onto their faces. "It was right there," he exclaimed, holding his hand aloft in the general direction of the house. "What other choice is there?" "Every choice," Kyra said gently, meeting his eyes for the first time since they had boarded the bus. "You know my head isn't in the right place for us to go halfway across the country. I need time." "We don't have time. We've no idea what's happened to them. We've no idea if this is what happened to them either." "Then let's go find out." Bailey and Dorian exchanged a knowing glance that Leo caught from the corner of his eye. The hope he had allowed himself to fleetingly feel was replaced with the all-too-familiar feeling of hopelessness. "I'm sorry, Leo. You know we'd support you through anything," Bailey started. "Just not this," murmured Leo, his hands forming into fists in his lap as he tried not to say anything he would regret. Silence on repeat was the soundtrack between the four of them during the final leg of the journey. The screaming of the other children as they threw things out the windows, or their muffled laughs as they pulled faces at their phones, gave Leo something else to try and focus on. "Will you still be going tonight?" Kyra asked Leo as the bus pulled up to their stop. "We don't all have a choice," Leo snapped back with more venom than he'd meant. "We'll see you there. I'm sure the rumours aren't true," Bailey smiled, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. Tonight was another meeting in the square. The meetings had been arranged as an opportunity for people to give updates on their searches and to provide a bit of hope for those who needed it. But as the weeks passed without a shred of solid evidence, more and more people were failing to show. What was meant to be a show of solidarity now served as a reminder of how many people had given up. The rumour Bailey was referring to was that today was going to be the last meeting, and it was time that everyone tried to come to terms with what had happened. "They can't stop looking. They can't give up hope," said Bailey. "Why not? We have." Leo picked up his bag and powered through the students who were waiting to get off the bus, not slowing down until he reached his home. Having thrown his bag onto the stairs, Leo slammed the door shut and slid down it until he reached the floor. No one was home. His mum was at work and his brother missing. He was alone. Leo allowed one solitary tear to escape his eye, but after that one had fallen, another soon followed. Before he knew it, Leo was curled up on the doormat and sobbing freely. Angry tears had been the first to fall, but after he had forgiven his friends, every other thought overcame him. He thought first about how selfish it was for him to expect his friends to just drop everything and come with him because he had a hunch. Then thoughts of his mother swirled in his head. He thought about how he should have been there more for her, how he should have done more to make sure that she was okay rather than the other way around. But finally, his biggest sobs had been saved for the thoughts that had haunted him for weeks. He should have saved his brother. He could have forced his way a little harder to get to him. He could have somehow jumped up and forced Sam down as the tornado took him instead. There must have been something more that he could have done, but he did nothing, and now he was here, alone. Hours must have passed, for when Leo woke up, everything was dark. He blinked his eyes and wiped them to try and decrust the dried tears, before moving to get up. As he moved his hands under his body, he felt some scrunched paper beside the doormat. Having gotten to his feet and turned on the light, Leo gradually opened the letter and saw some familiar scrawled handwriting, except this time there was more. "Dear Leo, time is getting late, but that does not mean we cannot change their fate. Come find me, I'm the one you have seen, but you will not find me anywhere you have already been. If you choose to come, know your life will never be the same. You leave behind your old self, all that will remain is your name. You'll learn what you were born to be, who you truly are beneath what the eye can see. You'll find me atop a hill by the biggest of lakes. The mill is unmistakable, you'll hear the sound that it makes. Come for the people, Leo, come for your brother. Leave behind what you think you know, Leo. Expect a place like no other. For in Libero, Leo, you'll find everything you think you lack. So be warned, for when you find Libero, Leo, you may not come back. There that feeling was again. Hope. Before Leo could read the letter for a fifth time, his heart sank as he realised that it must have been time for the meeting. He quickly rushed up to his room and chucked on the clothes he had left on the floor from the night before and headed out. It turned out that Leo was not late and was in fact the first to arrive in the square, the centre point of their small village. 2 benches sat on opposite sides of a light brown patch of grass where a flower bed spelt out, "Welcome." He stood still and allowed the cool air to flick his hair across his face as he looked up at the sky. Twinkling stars pierced the night's dark cloak, each one dwarfed by the glowing moon that kept a watchful eye on proceedings in the sun's wake. Lights went out in the surrounding houses as voices infiltrated the silence, followed by the sound of closing doors. Leo took this as the indication to place the first candle on the ground. "Hey," Bailey said, tentatively putting her arms around Leo upon reaching him. "Where's your mum?" "She's still at work. She doesn't like getting here before the candles have all been lit anyway," said Leo, watching as the candles grew in number on the short blades of grass. Dorian left his family towards the back of the gathering crowd to join Leo and Bailey, whilst Kyra came alone. Her father worked through the night. "It's preposterous, isn't it?" Dorian said, as Leo readied himself for a recital on what he was sure Dorian's parents had been talking about on their way here. "What is?" Kyra asked, her light green eyes reflecting an orange glint from the candles. "Do you remember the amount of press we had only a few weeks ago? What with how many people were still missing and without a single clue yet to go on?" Dorian briefly glanced at Leo. "I can't believe how quickly the press have withdrawn and moved on to the next story." "You realise there's been a major fire in Manchester, right? More people have died. They need them just as much as we do," stated Kyra. "And yet all they've done to help is interview crackpot theorists. I have yet to see a report on any of those who've lost their lives." "I've seen the stories about people believing it was the devil, or even a dragon," Bailey joined in. "Survivors say they saw it inside the fire. For some reason, people love to read that stuff. Since Rewan is no longer selling, we're yesterday's news." "It's preposterous," Dorian tried whispering, though his monotone voice stayed the exact same pitch. "Just say it's stupid, Dawes. You are not playing up to Mummy and Daddy now." Kyra rolled her eyes before placing her head onto Leo's shoulder where she whispered, "You okay? You know we are here for you, right?" "I know," he answered. "I've got to talk to you guys about something after this." He did not see it, but he was sure he felt them look at each other as he spoke. "We can talk about anything you want," Kyra said reassuringly. "But that can wait. Your mum's here." Without saying a word, Leo turned his back on his friends and immediately held his mother in his arms, and she squeezed him back as tightly as she could. The golden shimmer from the candles flickered on the faces of those who had answered the call to come this evening. Both women and men, mothers and fathers alike, were all trying to stay strong for the sake of their children as well as themselves. One man stepped forward from the crowd, a man Leo recognised as Mr. Leck, the father of one of the children who went to his school, one of the children also regarded as lost. Ever since the first search, Mr. Leck had taken charge of leading the village and the volunteers, and as time passed, his passion and belief had not dissipated, but he himself was unrecognisable from the man he had been before. Lowering his head towards the candlelight, his short black hair almost vanished as shadows were cast across his narrow face, giving him an almost skeletal look. "Thank you all for coming out tonight. It's been 5 weeks to the day since Rewan ripped through our dear town and stole so many of our loved ones," he began in a low, booming voice that echoed around the square. "I'm sure many of you have heard rumours about what's coming, and I'm afraid I stand before you to let you know that many of those rumours are true. Gasps echoed around the crowd as a flash went off from the only member of the local press who still bothered to turn up. "It's the news we've been dreading, but it's news that's been coming. Having spoken at length with the authorities, they have informed me that the resources the police and the fire service have laid on are going to be limited. With the debris cleared from our roads, they believe that we can now get back to normal." "But what about our children?" A haunting scream came from one of the ladies who was huddled up against a man in the crowd. "Yeah, what do they expect us to do? Just forget? My boy is still out there somewhere." Members of the crowd started to shout to anyone who would listen. Screams and cries of desperation from men, women, and children filled the air. "I know." Mr. Leck spoke with enough authority that even those most distressed did their best to silence themselves. "I know your pain. Believe me, I do. But just because they have stopped searching doesn't mean we will. Just because the world no longer cares doesn't mean we stop caring along with it. Just because everyone else has given up doesn't mean I will. I will search every inch of this world until I find my child again," Mr. Leck shouted, before taking some deep breaths and closing his eyes. The press are gone, and now so are the emergency services. But we remain. So as long as we stick together, we must believe that it is only a matter of time until we are all reunited with our families. We keep searching. We still have hope. If we still have hope, we keep searching. The crowd remained silent for a moment, allowing his words to sink in. "What now?" a man shouted. "Right now, we do all we can do. We continue our search. I need all those prepared to help to give me their details and availability. I will then make a plan utilizing all of our time and energy. Our best chance comes if we stick together, because our loved ones need each and every one of us. I will leave a sheet here. Please write your contact details along with any tools you have that could help." Mr. Leck looked directly into the flames, the orange glow flickering over his dark skin. "I want each of you to look at the candles before you. They have been lit as a signal of hope, not as a reminder of what has been lost. Do not let the light go out." As Leck stepped back into the crowd, Leo noticed that he was here alone, and for a moment the brave face he had worn for his speech was replaced by one of anguish. But that quickly disappeared as members of the crowd headed towards him, ready to put pen to paper. "I can't believe we've been left alone," Leo's mum said. "I mean, we've been looking for weeks now and not found anything. We can't find something that isn't there," Leo said, not having meant for it to sound as callous as it came out. "That doesn't mean something won't be found," she said as tears formed in her eyes. "We can't give up, Leo. We can't. Sam's out there waiting for us. I can't bear to think of him scared and all alone." Before Leo could catch her, his mum had fallen to her knees with her head in her hands. "I know, Mum. I know," he said, kneeling beside her and taking her into his arms. "The last thing we did was argue. He said he wouldn't come home, and I said good and shut the door. I can't let that be the last thing I'd say to him, Leo. I want my baby to know that I love him." As his mum's shoulders shook gently against him, Leo felt her tears roll onto his chest. As he comforted her, he found himself looking once more to the flames that burnt in the middle of the square. So many lost, and all they were left with was the faintest hope, a hope that felt like a bitter and twisted poison, staying only to eat away at them as they chose between the guilt of moving on and the sorrow of chasing a seemingly lost cause. "Libero," Leo muttered under his breath. "What did you say?" Leo's mother mumbled into his black hoodie. "Nothing," he lied. "What would you say to a little getaway if we've not managed to find anything come half term? I think it would be good for us to get away from everything for a bit." "I don't know," she whimpered. "Leo, this better not be what I think it is," Kara said, having knelt with them. "There's more to it now," Leo responded. "More to what?" Leo's mum asked. Leo has seen a word a couple of times, Athena, and he thinks I think we should give ourselves a bit of a break. Spending all our time turning over the same stones is going to make us go insane. Maybe if we took some time out of our little village, we could come up with some fresh ideas, Leo interjected. Leo's mum propped herself up and looked at Leo. I will think about it. If, come half-term, and that is a big if, we haven't found anything new, then we might be able to go away for a long weekend, she nodded. Could my friends come too? Leo asked. I give you an inch and you're already taking a mile, she said, slightly agitated. We'll see nearer the time. Before Leo could say anything further, one of their nosy neighbours came over. Athena, come here, a short bald man said, holding out his arms so he could lift Leo's mother up. We've all been saying just how shocking it is that, he spoke as he walked Athena into a small huddle of friends. That was weird, Leo said as he stood himself up. I'm still here, right? Who said that? Bailey joked as she and Dorian joined them. Funny, Leo said sarcastically, but I'm glad you're all here now. I've just spoken to my mum and I'm fairly sure I've persuaded her that we can go away for a bit in half-term. It didn't sound like it to me, snorted Kyra. So there are some terms and conditions, but if they are met, which I hope they aren't, then we might be able to go. On your wild goose chase, Dorian finished. Not exactly, just let me speak, Leo said as he pulled the letter from his pocket. This was posted through my letterbox today. Read it and tell me there isn't more to all of this. Leo held out the letter confidently, and even though they all looked apprehensive, Kyra's curiosity was first to give as she grabbed the letter. Do you believe me now? He asked as she finished reading. Kyra gave no response but to give Dorian the piece of paper. Having scanned it over a few times, he then passed it to Bailey. They all took their time reading each hastily written word, trying their best to find holes. And Leo braced himself for the questions that were sure to follow. But what is Libero? Kyra said at last. Right now, Libero is the little bit of hope we've all been looking for, Leo said determinedly. Will you guys help? The three of them looked at each other and then at the crowd lined up to give their details to search the same place they had searched countless times. Bailey and Dorian nodded, and Leo could not suppress his grin, but as he looked at Kyra, she immediately looked away. Gently, Leo took Kyra by the hand and led her to one side. Don't start, Leo. You know how much I want to come, mumbled Kyra, letting go of his hand. I know you do. I'm not going to force you to do anything you don't want to, though, Leo said, trying to meet her gaze. But it's so selfish of me to just stay here while you go off looking for your brother. What kind of friend does that make me? She said dejectedly, looking to the floor as her long, dark orange hair dropped down to cover her face. What kind of friend would it make me if I made you come with us? I want you to be safe, Kyra. You know that. I know you do, she muttered, allowing her light green eyes to meet his. I'll come with you, but I'll stay in my room if I need to, so even if I am there, I don't know how much help I'm going to be. I will try, though. Leo gave her a long, tight squeeze. I know you will, he whispered. Now what? Dorian questioned as Kyra and Leo returned. I guess we wait, Leo said. How am I going to persuade my parents to let me come, though? Bailey said, exasperated. Just blame it on my lost brother, Leo shrugged. Play all the guilt cards? Yeah, alright. Mum and Dad, you know how Leo has lost his bro? Can I go with him to the Lake District to try and find him? Well, you're not meant to tell them that we're looking for him there, Leo responded. You're right. That would sound odd, wouldn't it, Leo? She winked. So, we've actually got a plan, Kyra half smiled. Who'd have thought it? It isn't the best plan, Leo admitted, but it's hope. Leo's friends either gagged or face-palmed themselves at Leo, causing the crowd around to watch them and tut. Leo did not care what his friends said or did, for his heart was considerably lighter with them there. He gave them each a hug before he turned and looked towards the candles. As he looked at the fire, he thought back to the eyes he had seen in the storm, the eyes that burnt as true as the flames in front of him. Was this the creature trying to contact him? What if it was all a trap? Leo shook his head. If he wanted to attack them, it could have been done at any point. And so, for now, Leo settled on a feeling that had caused so much suffering, and for his friends some cringe, but for him it was something to hold on to. Hope. Thank you for listening to Chapter 2 of Instinct by James Carter. Instinct is available in all your usual bookstores such as Waterstones, Amazon, also available on Kindle, etc, etc. You can also find our song Free to Be by Ash Manakay on all your usual streaming platforms such as Spotify, Apple Music, and also its music video on YouTube. But otherwise, thanks again for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful evening or morning or day wherever you are. And also, I hope that you find your Libera.
We are up, but now we are free. No one is holding control